When the Lockheed P-38 Lightning first appeared in the skies over Europe in 1942, German fighter pilots regarded it with a mixture of curiosity and contempt. Its unconventional twin-boom silhouette and twin-engine configuration seemed awkward and cumbersome compared to the sleek, agile lines of their beloved Messerschmitt Bf-109s and Focke-Wulf FW-190s. Many veteran Luftwaffe aces, accustomed to the nimble performance of single-engine fighters, initially dismissed this American machine as an easy target, a lumbering heavy fighter that would be no match for German aerial superiority. They could not have been more wrong. As the air war over Europe and the Pacific intensified, German pilots discovered to their horror that the P-38's distinctive twin-engine design was not a liability, but rather a formidable advantage. The very features they had mocked, the separated engine nacelles, the twin booms, the tricycle landing gear, proved to be elements of a deadly fighting machine that would claim thousands of Axis aircraft and produce some of America's highest-scoring aces. The Germans gave it a name that reflected their growing respect and fear: Der Gabelschwanz Teufel, the fork-tailed devil. The story of the P-38 Lightning begins in February 1937, when the United States Army Air Corps issued Circular Proposal X-608, requesting designs for a high-altitude interceptor capable of reaching 20,000 feet in 6 minutes and achieving a top speed of at least 360 miles per hour at that altitude. This was an extraordinarily ambitious requirement for the era, demanding performance far beyond any existing fighter. Lockheed Aircraft Corporation, then a relatively small company known primarily for transport aircraft, saw an opportunity. Chief Engineer Hall Hibbard and his brilliant young assistant, Clarence Kelly Johnson, who would later design the SR-71 Blackbird, crafted a radical solution. Rather than attempting to extract the required performance from a conventional single-engine design, they proposed something entirely different: a twin-engine configuration that would become one of the most distinctive aircraft silhouettes of World War II. The design featured a central nacelle housing the cockpit and armament, with two Allison V-1710 liquid-cooled engines mounted in twin booms that extended back to support a distinctive twin-tail empennage. The engines drove counter-rotating propellers. The right engine's propeller rotated clockwise, while the left rotated counterclockwise, eliminating the torque effect that plagued most single-engine fighters and improving stability during takeoff and landing. This configuration offered several theoretical advantages. The concentrated nose armament would eliminate convergence issues that plagued wing-mounted guns on other fighters. The twin engines provided redundancy and power. The tricycle landing gear would improve visibility during ground operations and reduce the risk of nose-over accidents. On paper, it was brilliant. The prototype XP-38 first flew on January 27, 1939, from March Field in California, piloted by Lieutenant Ben Kelsey. The flight was successful, and the aircraft demonstrated remarkable performance. To promote the new design, Kelsey attempted a transcontinental speed record flight from California to New York in February 1939. The Lightning covered the distance in 7 hours and 2 minutes, but the prototype crashed during landing at Mitchell Field due to carburetor icing, a problem that would plague early P-38s. Despite the crash, the Army was impressed enough to order 13 YP-38 service test aircraft, and the Lightning was on its way to production. To appreciate why German pilots initially underestimated the P-38 and later came to fear it, one must understand the aircraft's specifications and how they translated to combat performance. Power plant and performance. The production P-38L, the most numerous variant, was powered by two Allison V-1710-111/11, 3 12-cylinder liquid-cooled engines, each producing 1,475 horsepower with war emergency power. This gave the Lightning a combined output of nearly 3,000 horsepower, more than double that of single-engine contemporaries. This immense power pushed the P-38L to a maximum speed of 414 miles per hour at 25,000 feet, making it one of the fastest propeller-driven fighters of the war. The aircraft could reach 20,000 feet in less than 7 minutes and had a service ceiling of 44,000 feet, higher than most Axis fighters could effectively operate. Perhaps most importantly for long-range escort missions, the P-38 had exceptional range. With internal fuel capacity of 410 gallons and provision for external drop tanks, the Lightning could escort bombers deep into enemy territory and still have fuel for combat and return. This endurance would prove crucial in both European and Pacific theaters. One of the P-38's most significant advantages was its concentrated nose armament. Unlike most fighters of the era, which had guns scattered in the wings and suffered from convergence issues, the guns were aligned to converge at a specific range, limiting effective firing distance. The Lightning's weapons were all mounted in the nose, clustered together. The standard armament package consisted of one 20mm Hispano ANM, 2 cannon with 150 rounds, 4 Browning M2.50 caliber machine guns with 500 rounds per gun. This gave the P-38 a combined firepower weight of approximately 4 pounds per second, devastating by any standard. The nose mounting meant that shells traveled in parallel trajectories, effective at any range where the pilot could aim accurately. There was no convergence pattern to worry about, no dead zones where some guns were effective while others weren't. German pilots who survived encounters with P-38s frequently reported the terrifying effectiveness of this concentrated firepower. When a Lightning's guns hit, they hit hard and accurately. Design features, innovation, and compromise. The P-38's design included several innovative features: counter-rotating propellers. Each engine drove a propeller that rotated in the opposite direction from the other. This eliminated the torque effect and made the aircraft more stable, particularly during takeoff and landing, critical advantages when operating from short or rough airfields. Tricycle landing gear. The P-38 was one of the first fighters to feature a nose wheel rather than a tail wheel. This improved forward visibility during taxiing, takeoff, and landing, and made the aircraft much easier to handle on the ground, particularly valuable for less experienced pilots. Turbochargers. Each engine was equipped with a General Electric turbocharger, enabling the aircraft to maintain power at high altitudes where German fighters suffered reduced performance. Dive brakes. Later models featured hydraulically operated dive flaps under the wings that allowed the pilot to control speed during high-speed dives, addressing one of the early P-38's most dangerous characteristics. However, the design also had inherent complexities. The twin-engine configuration meant more systems to maintain, more things that could go wrong, and greater logistical demands. The Allison engines, while powerful, were sensitive to proper maintenance and suffered from various teething problems, particularly in the harsh European climate. The P-38 saw its first extensive combat in North Africa during Operation Torch in November 1942. The 1st, 14th, and 82nd Fighter Groups arrived in theater equipped with P-38Fs, and German pilots got their first real look at the Lightning in combat. Initial encounters seemed to confirm German skepticism. Early P-38 models suffered from various problems, including poor cockpit heating, pilots literally froze at high altitudes, engine problems caused by the sandy desert conditions, and mechanical reliability issues stemming from rushed production and inadequate field maintenance procedures. German pilots in their Bf-109Gs and Italian pilots in their Machi C-202s found that they could often outturn the heavier American fighter in dogfights. The P-38's large size made it relatively easy to spot and its wide turning radius seemed to confirm that it was unsuited for close-in combat. Several P-38s were shot down in the early weeks, and German intelligence reports assessed the aircraft as inferior to the Bf-109 in maneuverability and only marginally superior in speed. Luftwaffe pilots began to develop tactics specifically for fighting the Lightning. They noted that if they could force the P-38 into a slow-speed turning engagement, its advantages evaporated. The standard approach became to dive on the Lightning from above, make a firing pass, and then extend away using superior acceleration at low to medium altitudes. One early engagement that seemed to confirm German contempt for the P-38 occurred during the infamous Channel Dash of February 1942, when German battleships Scharnhorst and Gneisenbach, along with the heavy cruiser Prinz Eugen, made their audacious daylight run through the English Channel. While this operation preceded the P-38's arrival in Europe in numbers, a handful of P-38s based in England attempted to intercept. The mission was a disaster. Poor coordination, bad weather, and mechanical problems resulted in the P-38s achieving nothing while suffering losses to German fighters and flak. German propaganda made much of the American fighters' failure, though in reality, the entire Allied response was bungled, and single-engine British fighters fared no better. As American pilots gained experience and aircraft performance improved with new variants, the tactical picture began to shift dramatically. Experienced P-38 pilots discovered that while they couldn't outturn German fighters in slow-speed engagements, they didn't need to. The P-38's advantages lay elsewhere. Speed. The Lightning was faster than any German fighter in level flight above 20,000 feet. This meant P-38 pilots could choose when to engage and when to disengage. If outnumbered or outpositioned, they could simply open the throttles and run, something German pilots couldn't prevent. Altitude performance. The turbocharged Allison engines allowed the P-38 to maintain power at altitudes where German fighters gasped for air. Above 25,000 feet, the Lightning had a decisive advantage in acceleration and climb rate. Zoom climb. The P-38's tremendous power allowed it to convert speed to altitude extraordinarily quickly. A Lightning diving on a target could fire, then pull up into a zoom climb that would carry it thousands of feet above pursuing German fighters, essentially resetting the engagement on favorable terms. Firepower. Once P-38 pilots learned to use their concentrated nose armament effectively, they discovered they could destroy enemy aircraft with short, accurate bursts at ranges where wing-mounted guns would be ineffective. Survivability. This is where the twin-engine configuration proved its worth in the most dramatic fashion. Perhaps nothing changed German pilots' assessment of the P-38 more dramatically than repeated instances of Lightnings limping home on a single engine after sustaining battle damage that would have doomed any single-engine fighter. The P-38's twin-engine configuration provided a level of survivability that was unique among World War II fighters. If one engine was shot out, disabled by mechanical failure, or damaged by flak, the pilot could shut it down, feather the propeller, and fly home on the remaining engine. This redundancy saved countless lives and meant that aircraft which would otherwise be total losses could return to base for repair. German pilots were astonished and frustrated to see P-38s they believed they'd shot down successfully continue flying, often escaping to fight another day. One Luftwaffe ace reportedly complained, "You could shoot one engine completely off that Teufel, and the damned thing would still fly home." There are numerous documented cases of P-38 pilots returning to base with one engine completely destroyed, the nacelle blown apart, sometimes with the propeller completely gone. The asymmetric thrust made the aircraft difficult to control and reduced performance significantly, but with proper technique, it was flyable, something impossible in a single-engine fighter. Lieutenant Colonel Jack Jenkins, a P-38 pilot with the 55th Fighter Group, recalled an engagement where his wingman's left engine was hit by 20mm cannon fire. There was a bright flash, pieces flying off, and I thought he was done for. But he kept flying, shut down the damaged engine, and we made it back together. The entire nacelle was basically gone. You could see right through where the engine had been. If he'd been in a P-47 or P-51 with that same damage, he'd have been bailing out over Germany. Instead, he landed that P-38, and 2 weeks later, it was back in action. The psychological impact of this survivability cannot be overstated. P-38 pilots knew that they had a better chance of surviving battle damage than pilots of single-engine fighters. This confidence translated into more aggressive tactics and a willingness to press attacks even when damaged. Conversely, German pilots found it incredibly frustrating. Achieving what should have been a kill, seeing cannon shells explode into an engine, watching it burn or tear apart, only to have the target continue flying, was demoralizing. It required German pilots to expend more ammunition and take greater risks to ensure a P-38 was truly destroyed, often putting themselves in danger from the Lightning's wingmen. One German pilot, interviewed after the war, admitted, "We learned to respect the Lightning. Shooting one down required either a perfect shot to the cockpit, or pilot, or patience to destroy both engines. Many times I was certain I had killed one, only to see it disappear into the clouds, still flying. It made us cautious." In the European theater, the P-38 faced some of its greatest challenges, but also achieved notable successes. The cold, wet weather of Northern Europe proved extremely problematic for early models. The Allison engines were prone to overheating on the ground and freezing at altitude. Intercoolers iced up, causing engine failures. Cockpit heating was inadequate, leading to frostbite among pilots during high-altitude missions. The P-38's large size and distinctive silhouette made it easy for German fighters and flak gunners to identify from great distances. In the close confines of European air combat, where engagements often occurred at lower altitudes and tighter quarters than in the Pacific, the Lightning's turning radius was a distinct disadvantage. German pilots in the West developed specific tactics for engaging P-38s. They would attempt to force vertical fights at lower altitudes, where the Bf-19 and FW-190 had better acceleration. They learned to attack from below and behind, where the P-38's visibility was poorest. And they always tried to separate individual Lightnings from their formations, knowing that an isolated P-38 could be overwhelmed. Despite these challenges, P-38 groups achieved notable successes in Europe. The 20th, 55th, and 364th Fighter Groups all flew Lightnings, and while they would eventually transition to P-51 Mustangs, they compiled impressive records during their time with the twin-engine fighter. The Pacific Theater was where the P-38 truly shined. The vast distances, generally better weather, once past the early tropical teething problems, and different tactical situation all favored the Lightning's characteristics. Japanese fighters like the Mitsubishi A6M0 and Nakajima Ki 43 Oscar were even more maneuverable than German fighters, capable of outturning anything the Allies flew. However, they were lightly built, poorly armored, and lacked self-sealing fuel tanks. The P-38's speed, firepower, and durability gave American pilots overwhelming advantages if they used proper tactics. The legendary boom and zoom tactic, diving on an enemy from altitude, firing a burst, then using speed to climb back to altitude before the enemy could respond, was perfectly suited to the P-38's capabilities and the characteristics of Japanese fighters. P-38 pilots learned to avoid turning dogfights entirely, instead using hit-and-run tactics that leveraged their aircraft's strengths. The results were spectacular. The top American ace of the war, Major Richard Bong, scored all 40 of his victories flying P-38s. The second highest scorer, Major Thomas Maguire, achieved 38 kills in the Lightning. In fact, of the top 10 American aces of World War II, 7 flew P-38s, and all of them flew in the Pacific. The twin-engine reliability was particularly valuable in the Pacific, where much flying occurred over vast stretches of ocean. A single-engine failure in a P-51 or P-47 over the Pacific meant ditching in the ocean with slim chances of rescue. In a P-38, the pilot could continue flying on one engine, dramatically improving survival chances. Perhaps the most famous P-38 mission of the war was Operation Vengeance, the interception and killing of Admiral Isoroku Yamamoto, commander of the Japanese Combined Fleet, on April 18, 1943. American codebreakers had intercepted and decrypted Japanese communications, revealing that Yamamoto would be flying to Bougainville Island. The only aircraft with sufficient range to intercept him were P-38s of the 339th Fighter Squadron based on Guadalcanal. 16 P-38Gs, led by Major John Mitchell, flew a meticulously planned 435-mile mission at wave-top height to avoid detection. The round-trip distance of 1,000 miles pushed the P-38s to their absolute limits, requiring perfect navigation and fuel management. The interception was successful. Captain Thomas Lanphier and Lieutenant Rex Barber attacked Yamamoto's bomber and its escort, shooting down both bombers. Yamamoto was in the first, and several escort fighters. Yamamoto was killed, a devastating blow to Japanese morale and a stunning demonstration of American reach and capability. This mission was only possible because of the P-38's unique combination of range, speed, and firepower. No other Allied fighter in the Pacific could have accomplished it. The mission demonstrated to the Japanese that nowhere was safe, and it showed conclusively that the Lightning was a strategic weapon, not just a tactical fighter. In Europe, P-38s participated in some of the most dangerous missions of the war, including escorts for bombers attacking the oil refineries at Ploiești, Romania, some of the most heavily defended targets in the world. These missions showcased both the P-38's capabilities and its vulnerabilities. The Lightning's range allowed it to escort bombers all the way to distant targets and back, something earlier fighters couldn't do. Its firepower was devastating against German fighters attempting to attack the bomber formations. However, the concentrated flak at targets like Ploiești was murderous. Several P-38s were lost to anti-aircraft fire, and others limped home severely damaged. Yet, here again, the twin-engine design proved its worth. Many aircraft made it back on one engine after suffering flak damage that would have destroyed single-engine fighters. German pilots defending these targets learned to time their attacks carefully, trying to catch P-38s when they were fuel-critical and couldn't afford prolonged combat. But P-38 pilots developed counter-tactics, maintaining tight formations and using mutual support to protect each other, learning to fight the Lightning. As the air war progressed, Luftwaffe fighter pilots developed increasingly sophisticated tactics for engaging P-38s. Altitude advantage. German pilots learned to avoid fighting P-38s above 25,000 feet, where the Lightning's turbocharged engines gave it superior performance. When possible, they would attempt to draw P-38s down to lower altitudes, where German fighters had better acceleration and climb rate. Separation tactics. German formations would attempt to split P-38 formations, isolating individual aircraft. A lone P-38 facing multiple Bf-109S or FW-190S was at a severe disadvantage, particularly if forced into a turning fight. Cockpit targeting. German pilots learned that the P-38's engines and systems could absorb tremendous punishment. The most effective way to guarantee a kill was to aim for the central nacelle and cockpit, where the pilot sat relatively unprotected compared to the engines in their separate nacelles. Energy fighting. Experienced German pilots avoided prolonged turning engagements, instead using vertical maneuvers and energy tactics that played to their aircraft's strengths. They would zoom climb, stall turn, and use the Bf-109's excellent vertical performance to negate the P-38's speed advantage. Respected adversaries. Despite their evolved tactics, German aces developed genuine respect for the Lightning and its pilots. In post-war interviews, many Luftwaffe veterans acknowledged that the P-38 was a formidable opponent when flown properly. Johannes Steinhoff, a German ace with 176 victories, commented, "The P-38 was dangerous in experienced hands. Its speed and firepower meant that its pilots could dictate the terms of engagement. If they chose to fight, they fought from advantage. If they chose to run, we couldn't catch them. And that damn twin-engine design meant you had to kill it thoroughly. Half measures would not do." Adolf Galland, the famous German fighter leader, noted in his memoirs that while he personally considered the P-51 Mustang to be the best Allied fighter overall, the P-38 had unique capabilities that made it extremely dangerous. The Lightning could not turn with our fighters, but it did not need to. Its speed, especially at altitude, its range, and its resilience, made it a weapon of strategic importance, and its concentrated firepower was devastating when properly employed. Addressing early problems. Lockheed and the Army Air Forces worked continuously to address the P-38's early shortcomings. Heating problems. Later models featured improved heating systems for both the engine and cockpit. The P-38J introduced electric heating suits for pilots, dramatically improving comfort and effectiveness at high altitude. Engine reliability, improvements to the Allison engines, better maintenance procedures, and improved cooling systems all enhanced reliability. The introduction of paddle blade propellers on the P-38J improved climb rate and overall performance. Dive characteristics. Early P-38s suffered from compressibility problems in high-speed dives. The aircraft would become nearly uncontrollable, and several were lost when they broke up under stress. The introduction of hydraulically operated dive flaps on the P-38J-25 and later models solved this problem, allowing pilots to control their speed during high-speed dives and pull out safely. Range extensions. Progressive improvements in fuel capacity and efficiency, along with the development of larger drop tanks, extended the P-38's already impressive range. Late-model P-38s could escort bombers to virtually any target in Europe or operate across vast Pacific distances. The P-38L, pinnacle of the line. The P-38L, introduced in mid-1944, represented the culmination of Lightning development. It featured 1,475 horsepower engines, improved systems, better armament, and most importantly, the reliability and refinement that came from 3 years of combat experience. The P-38L was faster, climbed better, and was far more reliable than early models. Pilots who had flown both early P-38s and the L model reported that they felt like completely different aircraft. The early bugs had been worked out, and the result was a mature, deadly weapon system. Major Richard "Dick" Bong became America's highest-scoring ace, with 40 confirmed victories, all achieved flying P-38s in the Pacific Theater. Bong's success demonstrated what a skilled pilot could accomplish with the Lightning. Bong was not naturally aggressive or a skilled marksman. What made him deadly was his tactical sense and his mastery of the P-38's capabilities. He understood energy management, knew when to engage and when to extend, and used the Lightning's twin-engine reliability to take calculated risks. His commanding officer, General George Kenney, said of Bong, Dick understands that airplane better than anyone I've ever seen. He knows exactly what it can and can't do, and he never asks it to do something it can't. That's why he's still alive and still killing Japanese. Tragically, Bong was killed in August 1945 while test flying a P-80 Shooting Star jet, not in combat, but in an accident during a routine test flight. He was 24 years old. Major Thomas Maguire, with 38 victories, was America's second-ranking ace. Unlike Bong, Maguire was naturally aggressive, sometimes to the point of recklessness. His flying style pushed the P-38 to its limits, using violent maneuvers and aggressive tactics that left his wingmen struggling to keep up. Maguire understood the P-38's strengths perfectly. He would attack from high altitude, diving at tremendous speed, fire a devastating burst, then climb away before the enemy could react. His gunnery was exceptional. Several of his victories were achieved with single short bursts that destroyed the target aircraft completely. Tragically, Maguire was killed on January 7, 1945, when he violated his own tactical principles. Leading a flight at low altitude over the Philippines, he saw a lone Japanese Ki-43 Oscar and attacked despite being low, slow, and carrying external fuel tanks. In the violent maneuvering that followed, his P-38 stalled and spun into the jungle, killing him instantly. He was 24 years old, and his death came just weeks before he would have surpassed Bong's score. Colonel Charles MacDonald, with 27 victories, was not only a successful ace, but also an innovative tactician who helped develop many of the techniques P-38 pilots used in the Pacific. MacDonald emphasized teamwork, mutual support, and disciplined tactics over individual glory. He developed formations and attack patterns specifically suited to the P-38's characteristics and the realities of Pacific air combat. His squadron and group achieved exceptional success while suffering relatively low losses, a testament to sound tactical leadership. MacDonald survived the war and continued to serve in the Air Force, eventually retiring as a colonel. His writings and teachings influenced fighter tactics for years after the war. One of the P-38's most important contributions was its strategic reach. Before long-range escort fighters became available, American bomber formations suffered devastating losses to German fighters. The P-38 was the first Allied fighter capable of escorting bombers deep into Germany and back. While the P-51 Mustang eventually became the premier escort fighter in Europe, the P-38 filled this crucial role first, helping to establish air superiority and enabling the strategic bombing campaign to continue. In the Pacific, where distances were even greater, the P-38's range was absolutely critical. Photo reconnaissance. An often overlooked role of the P-38 was photo reconnaissance. The F-4 and F-5 variants removed the nose armament and replaced it with cameras. These unarmed reconnaissance lightnings flew some of the most dangerous missions of the war, penetrating deep into enemy territory at high altitude to photograph targets for bombing campaigns. The lightning's speed and altitude performance made it ideal for this role. F-5s could fly at 40,000 plus feet, above the effective ceiling of most Axis fighters and flak. They could outrun interceptors and, if damaged, often had enough performance margin to escape. One F-5 pilot, First Lieutenant Roy Ayers, recalled, "We flew completely unarmed into the most heavily defended areas in Europe, counting on speed and altitude to keep us safe. The P-38 gave us both, plus the reliability to make it home. I had one engine shot out over Berlin, feathered the prop, and still had enough power on the remaining engine to stay above the flak and climb to safety. No single-engine plane could have done that." While designed as an interceptor and air superiority fighter, the P-38 also proved effective in the ground attack role. Its heavy armament, stability as a gun platform, and survivability made it deadly against ground targets. P-38s, equipped with bombs or rockets, conducted devastating attacks on enemy installations, shipping, trains, and troop concentrations. The twin-engine redundancy was particularly valuable in the low-altitude ground attack role, where battle damage from small arms fire and light flak was common. In the Pacific, P-38s were particularly effective against Japanese shipping, helping to strangle Japanese supply lines. The concentrated nose armament could literally saw ships in half with sustained fire, and the ability to accurately deliver bombs made the Lightning a feared anti-shipping weapon. The P-47 Thunderbolt was larger and heavier than the P-38, powered by a single massive radial engine. The Jug was rugged, could absorb tremendous punishment, and was an excellent ground attack aircraft. However, it had shorter range than the P-38 until late models with additional fuel capacity, and was slower at altitude. Both aircraft benefited from twin-engine redundancy in different ways. The P-47's radial engine was extremely resistant to damage and could continue running even with several cylinders shot out, while the P-38 could fly on one engine if the other was completely destroyed. P-47 pilots generally preferred their aircraft for European combat, citing its ruggedness and excellent roll rate. P-38 pilots pointed to their superior speed, range, and concentrated firepower. In truth, both were excellent aircraft suited to slightly different missions and tactics. The P-51 Mustang eventually became the premier American fighter of World War II, particularly in Europe. It combined long range, excellent performance, maneuverability superior to the P-38, and was cheaper and easier to produce. The Mustang could outturn, outclimb, and outmaneuver the P-38 at most altitudes and speeds. It was also easier to maintain, one engine instead of two, simpler systems, and greater parts commonality with other aircraft. However, the P-38 retained advantages in firepower, range in many configurations, and survivability. Mustang pilots had no second engine to fall back on if their Merlin was hit. P-38 pilots also appreciated the tricycle landing gear, better visibility in some situations, and the confidence that came with twin-engine redundancy. Many pilots flew both types. Most preferred the Mustang for air combat in Europe, but acknowledged that the P-38 had unique capabilities. In the Pacific, where the specific tactical situation differed, many pilots preferred the Lightning. Against the Bf-109, the P-38 had advantages in speed, especially at altitude, firepower, and range, but the German fighter could outturn it at lower altitudes and had better acceleration in some flight regimes. The 109's small size made it a difficult target, while the P-38's bulk made it easier to spot and hit. Against the FW-190, the matchup was more even. The German fighter had excellent roll rate and was deadly in hit-and-run attacks, but the P-38's speed and altitude performance generally allowed American pilots to control the engagement terms. Neither aircraft could outturn the other decisively, so fights often came down to pilot skill and tactical position. Lockheed produced 10,037 P-38s of all variants between 1941 and 1945. This made it one of the most numerous American fighters, though still far less common than the P-47, 15,660 produced, and P-51, more than 15,000 produced. The P-38's complexity made it more expensive and time-consuming to produce than single-engine fighters. It required more man-hours to build, more materials, and more complex assembly procedures. Maintaining P-38s in the field required more spare parts, more skilled mechanics, and more logistical support than simpler aircraft. These factors contributed to the decision to transition some P-38 groups in Europe to P-51s in late 1944. The Mustang offered similar performance with lower cost and simpler logistics. However, P-38 groups in the Pacific retained their Lightnings throughout the war, and pilots there generally resisted any attempts to re-equip them with single-engine fighters. The P-38's active service life ended quickly after the war. The advent of jet aircraft made propeller-driven fighters obsolete almost overnight. The P-38's complexity and maintenance requirements made it unattractive in the post-war drawdown when budgets were tight and simplicity was valued. By 1949, virtually all P-38s had been retired from frontline service. Some continued flying in secondary roles, reconnaissance, weather observation, and air-sea rescue. But even these were phased out by the early 1950s. Many P-38s were simply scrapped, their aluminum recycled into other products. Influence on future designs. Despite its relatively brief service life, the P-38 influenced future aircraft design in several ways. Twin-engine fighters. While jet-powered, aircraft like the F-82 Twin Mustang, F-89 Scorpion, and others owed a conceptual debt to the P-38's demonstration that twin-engine fighters could be effective. Concentrated nose armament. The advantage of grouping weapons in the nose, pioneered by the P-38, became standard in jet fighters where wing-mounted guns were impractical due to thin wings. Multi-role capability. The P-38's success as an interceptor, escort fighter, fighter bomber, reconnaissance platform, and ground attack aircraft demonstrated the value of multi-role designs, a concept that would become central to modern fighter development. Commemoration and preservation. Today, only a handful of airworthy P-38s remain, treasured by collectors and aviation enthusiasts. These restored aircraft appear at air shows around the world, their distinctive twin-boom silhouette and throaty roar instantly recognizable. Organizations like the Planes of Fame Air Museum, the Commemorative Air Force, and private collectors have invested enormous resources into keeping these rare aircraft flying. Each flight is a tribute to the men who flew them in combat and a reminder of the Lightning's unique place in aviation history. Museums around the world display P-38s in various conditions of restoration, from pristine restorations to preserved wrecks recovered from crash sites. Each aircraft tells a story of innovation, courage, survival, or sacrifice. After the war, when the guns fell silent and former enemies could speak candidly, German pilots' assessments of the P-38 were remarkably consistent. It was a formidable opponent that demanded respect and careful tactics. Walter Krupinski, a German ace with 197 victories, reflected, "The P-38 was never an easy opponent. In the hands of a skilled pilot who understood its strengths, it was deadly. Its speed meant we couldn't catch it if it chose to run. Its firepower meant we couldn't make careless attacks, and those damn twin engines meant we couldn't assume it was finished even when we hit it hard."